Okay, we're going to do an example of diagramming arguments. This is an example that I've used for many years in my class, and it's a little bit dated because it's about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but I guess they keep trying to reboot them, so maybe they'll come back again. We're going to refer to this handout on diagramming arguments that is available to you through Blackboard. And we're going to go through the steps in order. The first step is to go through the relevant passage and write out every asserted proposition as a standalone sentence, replacing all context-sensitive words like it and this and she with what they refer to. And we're going to write them all out in a numbered list. We're not going to include indicator words or sentences that function as indicators. We're not going to include propositions that are merely repeats of previous propositions. That's not going to come up in this one. Don't break if-then sentences in half, because each proposition in the if-then statement is expressed. We're listing all of the ones that are asserted. Do make sure that you separate all genuinely distinct propositions. This includes when you're using the conjunction and or something like it, like but. All right, so this is the argument. First step is to go through and list the propositions. Why don't you pause this video and do that now? Okay. Let's see what I've got and see if it matches what you've got. Well, first one. One of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles assaulted Shredder. Now, notice what I didn't include is it is obvious that. We're not including that because that functions as an indicator. That's going to tell us that this is supported by other propositions, because there's a reason that it's obvious that it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles who assaulted Shredder. It's because of other propositions. Another indicator word coming up is because, and if you remember, that's an indicator word for a premise. The next proposition then is Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile. That's fine. Again, standalone with a period at the end of it. Next one. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are the only reptiles who practice karate. Now you notice that I haven't included this part. And that's because that is a proposition in its own right. And that's going to come next. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles consist of Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael. I added consist of, you can just say are. So this single sentence contains a proposition embedded within it. So there's one proposition, which is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are the only reptiles who practice karate, and then the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. Okay, next one. Shredder's assailant could not have been Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello. And here's another indicator word coming up, since, which is an indicator word for a premise, which is going to help us when we do the diagram. Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Donatello were in a newsmaker interview with April O'Neil at the time of the assault. Now, you might think, well, couldn't I separate those out into separate propositions? So couldn't we say Michelangelo was in a newsmaker interview? New proposition, Leonardo was in a newsmaker interview, and so on. So in other words, couldn't I break this into three separate propositions? Yes, you could. There's no harm in that, but there's also no point to it, because we're treating them as a group, and the same reason applies to all three of them. If there was different reasons for each one why it couldn't have been them, then you would have to separate them out. So for example, if the reason it wasn't Michelangelo is because he was in prison, the reason why it was Donatello is because he was passed out drunk, something, and those are two distinct reasons, then you would have to separate them out. But because it's the same reason for all three, we can keep them together and keep things simple. Finally, Raphael assaulted Shredder. Okay, so that's all of the propositions. And so that's stage 1 in our diagramming arguments sheet. All right, what's the next stage? 2, find the conclusion. All right. Now, there are 2 candidates for the conclusion because there's 2 cases of words that seem to indicate conclusions. Here's one. We've seen that so is an indicator for a conclusion, and I already mentioned that it is obvious that appears to do the same thing. So one of them is going to be the conclusion, and the other one is going to be a sub-conclusion. Now, which is which? Well, what do you think? If you think that it's number 7, I agree with you, because that's the most specific one. So we're going to write that at the bottom of our diagram, and we're going to check off number 7. All right, so that was number 2. What's next on our sheet? If there are more than about 5 propositions in your argument, it helps to check off each proposition. Okay, we've done that. Look for a proposition that seems to offer immediate support or evidence for the conclusion. A proposition that seems to offer an answer to the question, what reason do I have to believe the conclusion? Okay, well, let's look at it in this case. Raphael assaulted Shredder. How do we know? What's the most obvious, immediate information in support of that? Well, one thing that seems directly relevant is that it was one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Okay. Now, but is that enough by itself? In other words, could that just be an independent premise? And I think it's clear that it couldn't be, because there's several of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we can't know that it's just one of them without further information. Now, you might also be thinking, well, wait a minute, how do I know that it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Don't worry about that right now. What we're worrying about is what would prove that it's Raphael. And we don't have to worry about what would prove this one yet. We're worrying about what would prove number 7. So, would it being one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that assaulted Shredder prove that it's Raphael directly? No. So in other words, that means that this one is a dependent premise, and we're going to need some more information. Well, it would help to have a premise that actually mentions Raphael, because otherwise how are we going to prove that it's Raphael? And I think you can see that an obvious one is number 4. Because if we just look at number 1, it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that assaulted Shredder. Why doesn't that prove that it's Raphael? Well, for one thing, we don't know that Raphael is one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We have to state that information, and that's contained in number 4. All right, so it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that includes Raphael. Does that prove that it is Raphael yet? Well, no, because of course now we know there are 4 of them, and we just know that it's one of the 4. Why those 2 facts by themselves do not prove that it's Raphael. So it looks like we're going to need another proposition. So this is a case where there's more than 2 dependent premises. And obviously this is possible because it's happening right now. Okay, well, what would we need to do? We know that it's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, and we know that there are 4 of them. In order to prove that it's Raphael, we need to eliminate the other 3. We need to have a proposition that says that it isn't the other 3. Which one is that? And the answer is number 5. So we've used 1 and 5. Okay. Do those 3 together do it? So, Raphael assaulted Shredder. What's your evidence? It's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They consist of Raphael, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and it wasn't could not have been, in fact, Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello. Those put together do prove that it was Raphael. Okay, so we have got rid of, have I forgotten to, yes, I forgot to cross that one off. All right, what next? Well, I've been doing some of this anyway. It says, ask, is this a dependent or an independent premise? And we did that. They were dependent premises. Now we need to make sure that we've checked off every one on our list. And of course we haven't. We have to include 2, 3, and 6. Where did they go on this diagram? Well, now would be a good time to remember that number 1 is a subconclusion. That's what this was an indicator for. So that means that there's going to be a premise or premises above it leading to it. Okay, so you ask, it's one of the, here's where we do worry about evidence in support of this one. So, it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What's your evidence? And which are the propositions that show that? Well, I think we can see that it's 2 and 3. So 2 and 3 are definitely above 1. Now the question is, are they independent, an arrow going from each to number 1, or are they dependent with a cross, with a plus and an arrow going, a single arrow going from both? Well, let's try it. So let's try it independent. It's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles assaulted Shredder. What's your evidence? Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile. That doesn't show it yet. I mean, for all you know, there's karateing snakes or something. You don't know otherwise. So that the fact that he was karate chopped by a reptile doesn't prove that it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What about number 3? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are the only reptiles who practice karate. Does that prove that it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles who assaulted Shredder? No, because we don't even know that Shredder was karate chopped. If we just focus on these two. So it's only when you combine the two that it works. So remember, when you go up an arrow, you should be getting the answer to a what's your evidence or how do we know or why question. So, one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles assaulted Shredder. What's your evidence or how do we know? Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile. Now, because that's not enough, we have to go over a plus. And when you go over a plus, you should be answering a different question. And the question is, so what? Okay, so one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles assaulted Shredder. What's your evidence? Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile. So what? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are the only reptiles who practice karate. Karate, I believe they say. All right, that works. Good. So we've got rid of 2 and 3, and all that's left is number 6. Okay, where does number 6 go? Well, if you look at it, we haven't paid attention to this indicator word. So we said this one was number 5. The one before it is number 5. Shredder's assailant could not have been Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello, since Michelangelo, and notice I replaced the word they there with Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello. As it says, you've got to make him stand alone, replace context-sensitive words like it and this and she, and in this case they, with what they refer to. So I did. But this is an indicator for a premise. So what that tells us is that the one that follows the since, which is number 6, is a premise for the one before it, which is number 5, which means that 6 goes up there. And that is the diagram. Now, 7 propositions. Not that many, but I think this one was a little bit tricky, partly because you probably were not used to the idea that there can be 3 dependent premises. But I think this will prepare you nicely for a question on the homework that you're going to come across about a football team. Because there's going to be a similar strategy of eliminating candidates. Again, it's sort of a crime example. Someone on the football team is responsible for a crime, and we've got to eliminate various candidates and arrive at a single one. So I think this works as a good example.